Here we are at Astrology Night on the first Wednesday night of March 2014 to talk about this very crazy swirl of events that we find ourselves in and to talk about what's going to happen over the month ahead.
Well, the first thing we want to share is that we are just getting into some intensely transformational times. Rick and I have been speaking here, and you've heard this every month for 3 years now, about the ongoing right angles or squares between the two outer planets, Uranus and Pluto, that were joined together in the mid-60s, representing the cultural, political, and social revolutions, which were worldwide events of the 1960s. Round 2 of a different flavor is coming up. We've gotten...
Not coming up, it's here.
Well, it's here. It's here in Venezuela. It's here, unfortunately, in Syria. It's here in Ukraine. And
Egypt, and in this country, although it's a little bit couched behind some kind of institutions that hold things in place here.
That's right. And one thing that we've shared from this platform before, and I want to share with you again, when we look at the news of the world, it can often be disheartening. They're about issues that are complicated, that very few people understand, even the experts, and that can leave us feeling disempowered by the craziness of the world. And yet Uranus, which is the planet of liberation and freedom, a planet which has been described as the sun behind the sun, whereas the sun represents our consciousness on this level, in the center of this solar system, Uranus represents the next level of consciousness, somewhat like Jung's notion of individuation. And Uranus is in the individualistic sign of Aries, and what that means is we each have the capacity to make breakthroughs on personal levels, which can liberate us and help contribute to a collective process that may reduce some of the suffering in the world and help the transformations that you and I, from a social and political level, just do not have the clout to do anything about directly.
Yeah, well said. I've said here before, quoting Jung, that in his last book that he wrote, The Undiscovered Self, in mid-50s, I think, he said that the salvation of the world, the end of wars, will not come from politicians, making treaties. It will happen by the salvation of each individual within the world. And that's what Jeff is talking about. What we're talking about is curing the larger ills by taking care of the personal aggressions and problems that we face in our lives. When we clean up the individual relationships in our life, if everyone did that, then we wouldn't be projecting our shit globally onto a larger stage. And that's largely when we see these large-scale events, people responding to political repression, whether it's in the United States, where it's sometimes more subtle, or whether it's in Egypt or Syria or Venezuela or Thailand or now in Ukraine. It's basically the same issue, and it has to do with the difference between what's the stress and tensions we feel on the inside and how that's projected outside and how it's suppressed or repressed by governments.
Yeah, and how...
And religions, excuse me.
Yeah, and how we repress it ourselves. I mean,
that's the point. If we didn't repress it or suppress it ourselves, then there would be nothing to repress or suppress externally. That would kind of be part of, it would disappear in effect.
Exactly, and I think that's very apropos for other astrological reasons. One, the sun now through the 20th of the month is in the sign of Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, a sign that is arguably the most sensitive of all of the signs. So there's a greater degree of sensitivity and perhaps vulnerability that goes along with that. But in addition to having the sun in Pisces, which of course happens every year at this time, we have a unique or relatively unique event with Mars, the planet of action and aggression, which went retrograde or began moving backwards on the 1st of March, and it's doing it in the relationship sign of Libra, which means that we may be hypersensitive in relationships. And what we often do, or I'll own it, what I often do when I'm vulnerable is I get defensive. And I either withdraw or I get aggressive. And yet it is in that place of vulnerability where obviously I'm wounded. And that's where the work is to be done, not with the person who triggered the pattern that I had in myself. So we've got an opportunity while Mars is retrograde in Libra, which ends March 19th, March 20th, depending on May 19th or May 20th, depending upon where you are in the world, we're likely to see sort of the skin of relationships be pulled tighter to a place where if we're just barely touched or breathed upon, where we are insecure, the reverberations and the reactions are likely to be stronger. On the positive side, this can also mean there can be some sublime and delicious opportunities for connection if we're able to stay sensitive and stay present in a place of such vulnerability.
This retrograde dance is really significant for a number of reasons. I mean, Mars goes retrograde from Earth's point of view. It looks like it moves backwards about every year and a half, every year and 3/4, right in there. And so it's not like Mercury, which turns retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time. When Mars goes retrograde, it's when the Earth comes between Mars and the Sun, so Mars gets brighter and brighter in the sky because it's actually coming closer and closer to Earth. And contrary to the email that you might get that looks like it comes from NASA, Mars will not get brighter than the Moon, just saying. However, what's interesting is that when a planet goes retrograde, its energy is amped up because it gets closer to Earth. We're coming off of a string of retrogrades that began back in, well, Venus moved into Capricorn in November, it turned retrograde in December, and was retrograde all through January. Then Mercury turned retrograde as Venus turned direct. It was retrograde all through February, and now Mars is retrograde all through March and April and on into May. Venus, Mercury, and Mars are the astrological personal planets. What that means is that they're close, relatively close to Earth from a cosmic point of view. Mercury is how we talk and listen and how we think, how we send and receive information. Venus is what we like, and Mars is how we get it. And so in a way, these inner planets, which have been sluggish or going backwards, covering old ground, and yet amped up because they're closer to Earth, have been in direct, I don't want to say opposition, but in contrast to the outer planets, which are pushing onto the square that Jeff was talking about, that's stirring things up on a very, very deep and profound level of transformation and revolution and social change and economic change, and these pressures that we all feel that when we can see when we look at the world news. What does that mean for us? It means that personally, we may be feeling frustrated or covering old ground or feeling like we've been here before, and yet, and this is the thing to keep in mind, through this period of time, through January, February, March, April, and even into May, it may not feel like it, but we are making progress. It may not feel like it because the personal energy is being stirred backwards, but the larger tide is still moving, and we just need to keep that in mind as we move through this period of time.
Yeah, that's a good point, or those are several good points. These personal planets, Mercury of intellect, Venus of love and attraction, and Mars of action, are really not about who we are, but how we operate. Astrologically, the sun and the moon are really closer to the essence of who we are. But Mercury is how we gather information intellectually. Venus is how we reflect our worth through attraction, love, and relationships. And Mars is how we get things done. So the fact that all three have been retrograde at one point already in a year that we're, you know, that's only 1/6 over, or slightly more than that over, that's not about necessarily changing the core of who you are, but how you are, how you interpret information, how you interpret love and relationships, and how you function in an active way. And I think one of the things that's really helpful in personal growth is being able to suss out the difference between behavior and essence. Because we can all act like jerks at times, we can all behave brilliantly at times, but neither of those makes us a jerk or brilliant. It just means we are behaving or acting in that way. So understand now that the car of life keeps rolling. The engine is purring. We're going forward. There's gas in the tank. But there may be adjustments of steering, of headlights, of other things. And if you can, particularly over the next 2.5 months with Mars retrograde, really notice how you push and how you allow yourself to be pushed without thinking that that's you, but that's a mechanism that gives you a little breathing room. And out of that breathing space, there's a dash of objectivity and the possibility to awaken and to change patterns.
And the necessity to change patterns is significant when Mars goes retrograde, because remember, Mars is the planet of war. Mars is the god of war. Mars is the angry red planet. It's how we aggress, it's how we assert ourselves, it's how we defend our territory, it's how we march into new territory, it's how we step on the gas pedal of our car of life. And when Mars goes retrograde, what happens, because it gets brighter in the sky, because it gets closer to Earth, our assertion, our need for assertion, our anger, our fierceness gets greater. What does that mean? You can look back at headlines over the century, and when Mars is retrograde, whatever the local conflicts are around that time, they seem to go a little bit out of control. You know, whether it's the Israeli Six-Day War, or whether it was the Tet Offensive during the Vietnamese War, there's always a heating up of whatever it is that's going on. It's like the pissing match gets a little bit pissier. We become more assertive and more angry and more, and the reason is because there's more Martian energy and it bottles up. And if we could just figure out ways to move with it and to express it, then we wouldn't necessarily have to punch someone or drop a bomb on them or deliver, you know, economic sanctions to them or whatever. And the problem is doubled by the fact that, and Jeff talked about this a little bit, a lot actually, a couple months ago, and that is that Mars retrograding in Libra is almost like a double retrograde, because Libra is a peaceful sign. You know, Libra is a Venus-ruled sign, and so Mars in Libra wants to aggress and wants to start a war nicely. We're talking about martial arts in a way. We want to kill and maim, but we don't want to hurt anyone in the process. And so Mars has a hard time being Mars while it's in Libra, and then you back it up and you heat it up, and we do have a little bit of a problem that we're now seeing playing out in the Ukraine. And I just want to go on record saying that because of how this is heating up now, and it will continue to as Mars continues to retrograde, and we will talk more, maybe we'll touch on it a little bit tonight, but certainly next month, and that is the building of this, the Uranus-Pluto square, which has moved in and out of exact phase for the last 1.5 years and will for the next 1.5 years or more. The next round of exactness on this is April 20th. And retrograde Mars, and Jupiter at that time too, are all in the mix at that point in time. And so what we're seeing here now playing out in Venezuela, not so much because there's a media blackout on it, but it's melting down, and in Ukraine and in other places, is not going to go away. This is basically the latest brush fire on the same issues that began during the Arab Spring and the Occupy Madison, Wisconsin, and Wall Street that seem to go nowhere in this country, but it's all part of the same astrological fire that's popping up as brush fires and ain't going away.
Yeah, one of the things about retrograde is that it often brings up things from the past. So it's sort of like we're reliving this Ukraine issue. Americans are reliving the Cold War. You know, sort of Russia was the big enemy when it was the Soviet Union, and then we got Al-Qaeda-ized, and we focused on that.
And that was during the 60s, during the mid-60s, during the Uranus-Pluto, when we were fighting in the war in Vietnam. It was basically a pissing match between the United States and the then Soviet Union, but playing in this little field far away where no one in this country got hurt.
Right.
Except for killed. You know?
So on a personal level, since Mars in Libra is challenging to begin with, because Libra is about being gracious, and yet Mars is about being aggressive, and that's what Rick was talking about. How do you defeat the opponent without really being apparently looking aggressive? Well, on a personal level, what this means is we are likely to have old relationship issues stirred up again with Mars retrograde in Libra. When you get annoyed at someone in your life, and when it is approaching potential conflict, think about the past. And if your current situation reminds you of something that you've likely gone through with this individual before, or another individual in a similar situation. In this way, the value of astrology is to make us conscious that we're going to see things we've seen before, yet, hopefully, from a new perspective.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I was thinking today that part of the problem with Ukraine, because we as Americans, I mean, let's face it, Putin is not exactly an adorable figure. I mean, it's very easy to project a lot of negativity on him, which may well be deserved based upon...
Especially since Bush is out of the picture.
That's right. We have to blame somebody. And I'm certainly not justifying him. But it's interesting. Libra is a sign of fairness. And I'm not an expert on the subject, but my little understanding is a lot of the people in the disputed area were Russian nationals. And if there was a vote taken in Crimea, it's quite possible that the people in Crimea would want to be reabsorbed into Russia. Now, I'm not saying that that justifies any militaristic behavior that they want to spit up. But it's quite interesting that I think it's real easy to get in an old fight. Oh, that old Putin, those stinky old Russians, they're doing it again. Well, it's not exactly the same, and I'm not letting them off the hook. But here's the issue that I would like to bring up about this. Excuse me, sir, could you take that call somewhere else, please? Sir? Sir? Can you take it out of range? Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. Here's what I was thinking today. The big stuff, the real stuff behind the day-to-day headlines is radical transformation, Uranus square Pluto. If we don't bring, on the political level, something radically new and different to our understanding of geopolitics and how things work, well, we're just going to replay the same old story. So as I suggested to you on a personal level, changing the way you respond in relationships also is a model, I think, on a national or international level to look at things. In other words, we're caught in the same choices. Oh, Ukraine has either got to go east or west. Really? Those are the only choices? This is 2014. Aren't we going to reshape the world in some other interesting ways? So take this as a personal model to be more inventive in your own relationship.
Well said. Well said. I want to come back to the retrogrades just for a moment, because we talked about Venus having retrograded in Capricorn, and in a few minutes we'll talk about her escape out of Capricorn, where she's been since November, into Aquarius. We talked a little bit about Mercury retrograding last month. She went into Pisces and retrograded back into Aquarius, and now we'll move forward and again be back in Pisces this month. We've talked about Mars, which is just turning, which is not moving very, Mars hasn't moved hardly more than a few degrees in the last month, and it's not moving much now because when a planet goes retrograde, it has to stop to change directions from Earth's point of view. So Mars is also in this swirl of lack of movement. Then we look at Saturn, which goes retrograde once a year, but Saturn had been retrograde, and Saturn had been direct, and Saturn turns retrograde also on the first of the month, or first or second of the month.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, today, Jupiter, which has been retrograde, is now stationary and turning direct. So we have this incredible swirl of planets that are not just the Mercury, Venus, and Mars, but also Jupiter and Saturn. And it's very unusual for so many planets that are in all different signs to be either retrograde, turning direct, or retrograde, or direct turning retrograde, all around the same time. And it's really, you know, it's like being on a merry-go-round, and if everything in your environment is spinning at the same speed, or if you're in the center of the merry-go-round and the merry-go-round is spinning, if you move around at the same speed as the merry-go-round, it looks like it's not moving. And in a way, all these planets that are stationary are doing this weird thing that's like a weird kind of Twilight Zone moment in time, where it doesn't appear like things are moving at the speed that they really are. And again, the amount of frustration that we might have in our personal lives is an important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's 4 planets changing directions within a 1 week, within a 7-day period of time. And as we pointed out here on previous occasions, when planets change direction, that is, go forward or go retrograde, the moment they're doing that, they're virtually standing still. And when planets stand still, they have that weird Twilight Zone energy that Rick mentioned, because we're used to them moving, and they weigh more heavily.
Karmically, energetically.
Right, but they're not going anywhere. It's an interesting situation. It's like having somebody just say something that shouldn't be said in the middle of the family gathering. It's really heavy, and everybody just stops. There's nowhere to go with it. It's difficult to, you can't undo it, and it's such an uncomfortable and difficult thing that we may not know how to go forward with it.
You know, it's also like, and this actually comes from an illustration by the astrologer Grant Louis, who was a brilliant astrologer who wrote in the 40s and early 50s. And Grant Louis said, it's like if someone comes over to your house once a month for dinner, a drink, and a game of chess, and then goes home. And then 1 month they come over and they do the exact same thing, but they stay for 8 months. It's the same event, but the weight of it is different. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's just what Jeff said, and it's a very interesting way, because normally Mars whizzes through a sign in a couple months, or Venus whizzes through a sign in a month, but Venus has been in Capricorn since November. Mars will be in Libra for 8 months total, instead of a couple of months. And so if you have planets in Libra, or in signs that Libra aspects, that Mars coming to visit for 8 months rather than an evening is a very different and heavier energy.
Definitely.
And we have to do something with it. You know, it's like if you're sitting at breakfast and you look over your newspaper at your spouse and you go, "Ooh, what did I do?" You know, and you're in a bad mood and you hate him or her that morning, but by the time coffee's done or whatever, you feel better. It's cool. But if you have that feeling for days and days and days and weeks, in and out, without it going away, you're not in a bad mood, or you're not in a bad moon. You're in a bad Saturn. And that's serious stuff, and you got to do something about it. So these these inner planets that go retrograde often change our perspective on things that sometimes need change.
Yeah, I want to say something about the signs that Saturn and Jupiter are in their stations. Saturn is in Scorpio, which is about carefully measuring resources and usually having a sense of there not being enough. So that Saturn going retrograde in Scorpio can emphasize that fear that we're not going to get enough from others. On the international level, Ukraine isn't going to get the gas it needs from Russia. Russia's not going to get the wheat it needs from Ukraine. But Scorpio is about an exchange of resources. And Saturn going retrograde can sort of reiterate our fear of not getting enough, whether it's from a loved one, whether it's from our job, or from life in general. And yet, Jupiter, the planet of optimism, expansion, growth, Jupiter turns direct tomorrow. And it turns direct, or it slowly begins its forward movement in the sign Cancer, which is self-nourishing. In other words, if you're not happy with what you're getting from others, and certainly relationships are a key issue with this Mars retrograde in Libra, before you try to squeeze every dime out of your boss or more out of your partner, recognize that over the next few days and weeks, you may be able to generate more joy, optimism, love, and enthusiasm within yourself. That's Jupiter in Cancer. It's the recognition that we all are growing creatures. Ironically, we're mortals who are all on our way to dying, but we keep growing in the sum of experience we have. And the collected wisdom of our own experience is something I think that we may begin to pick up more of over the days and weeks ahead.
And just as a point of clarification, I said earlier that Jupiter was changing directions today, and Jeff said tomorrow, and it's actually like at 2:40 a.m. tonight. But these are such large objects that a calculation of a time, from Earth's point of view, it looks like it ain't moving. I needed to use bad grammar in there somehow. It looks like it ain't moving, and the fact is that it's holding. From Earth's point of view, it's holding still, and it'll take a few days before it gets moving, but still, it's like a very profound time. And it takes that Jupiter is also the planet that has to do with diplomacy, with international affairs. And so it's like I don't have a TV, but I have a friend who I talked to today who said, I turn on the TV and it doesn't matter what time of day or night on it. It's the same thing in Ukraine right now that's been like stuck on that for several days. And yeah, the events have changed a little bit, but the energy, the dynamic is exactly the same. And I kept thinking, yeah, it's that Jupiter protecting, its space. Without it doesn't want to move yet. Diplomacy ain't going to do anything yet.
No, but let's have fun, because on a personal level, Venus, the planet of pleasure and fun, is finally out of the business suit sign of Capricorn. And we've already gotten complaints from Venus and Capricorn people who...
Well, we posted on the website our talk for today, our Planet Pulse video, and which we said, yay, Venus is finally out of being restrained in Capricorn. And one person said, I like my corsets. And another person said, hey, I know how to play, and I have Venus in Capricorn. So yeah, maybe we dissed poor Venus.
Yeah, which we do. It's part of our job. But Venus today has entered weird, strange, quirky, iconoclastic Aquarius, which is about opening us up, not on a philosophical level, but on a taste level, on a pleasure level, to being more liberal, to tasting things we wouldn't normally taste, to be accepting of people and appreciative of things that don't fit our normal sense of aesthetics.
Yeah, Venus is the planet of beauty. Keats wrote, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Venus is what we're attracted to, it's what we desire. Venus is what we like. It doesn't mean that we like it once we get it, but the idea of it, we like it. And in Capricorn, Venus was rather constrained. She liked playing by the rules.
And accomplishing things.
That's right.
So one of our complainants is building things. So she's having a good Venus in Capricorn time.
That's right. She is in the process of building something. Anyhow, so Venus, when Venus gets into Aquarius, she basically trades in her personal attorney and her attaché case with contracts and her business suit for maybe a Wonder Woman outfit, something a little crazy or something.
Mylar underwear, whatever you like.
Right.
Space clothes.
Space clothes, yeah. And you know, and instead of hanging out with a successful businessman, she's off with David Bowie. You know, there's that sense of attraction to that which is out of the box. Aquarius is the weird sign. It's other than normal. It's unusual. It does it my way. So with Venus moving into Aquarius, Mercury already in Aquarius, we're in a period of time where new and different things might sound good to us. It doesn't mean we're living that way, but it means that we might be tired of the same old, you fill in the blank in your life.
Well, it also means it's not just what we're attracted to, it's what we're able to appreciate in ourselves.
Yes.
So the oddball part of you that doesn't fit in, you know, Capricorn is like a box or a cube. Aquarius is more like a diamond, which has these facets that go off at all these different angles. It's a multiplicity of perspectives, which is why it's so open relative to the preceding sign.
So we have Venus that's now gone into Aquarius and will be there for about a month. We have Mercury, which is also in Aquarius, but Mercury does make an escape, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Mercury escapes into Pisces on the 17th. So
before that, the next big event is the full moon on the 16th. And the full moon is always an opportunity to awaken and to get overwhelmed. Because the sun and the moon are as far apart from one another as they can be. And the bright full moon is a metaphor for the fullness or the extremes of experience that we're challenged to integrate or to identify with. On the one hand, the sun's in Pisces. Hey man, it's legal now, who cares? On the other hand, the moon is in Virgo and there are DEA agents who are still trying to justify their jobs.
Yeah, this is an interesting full moon. When I look at this, it's noisy, but it's not necessarily an intense full moon. There's lots of lines going on. There's stuff going on between the planets. However, when we look at a new moon or a full moon, we most often look at what are the angles or the aspects from the moon and the sun. And here there is one aspect that is outstanding that makes this full moon important, and it is this stationary retrograde Mars that's beginning to move backwards now. It's been going backwards for a couple weeks, but it's barely moved. And it is forming a quincunx. These green lines are 5/12ths of a circle. They're angles of, Jeff calls them oil and water. They're angles that have to do with energy that doesn't mix. There's an annoying, kind of irritating aspect. And the fact that Mars is not fitting into this, I think, is really important.
Yeah, particularly because the basic contrast to the moon in Virgo and the sun in Pisces is that Virgo is earthy, concrete, specific, and efficient. Pisces is magical, emotional, poetic, and diffuse. And it's almost as if we're asked to get, have you done this yet? Have you done the job I asked you to do? Have you done the cleanup yet? The moon in Virgo asked the sun in Pisces, and Mars in Libra in the quincunx is very happy to lie. Yeah, I'll get to it, or I'll get around to it. I mean, Mars in Libra is sort of this potentially passive-aggressive behavior or indirect anger, and a quincunx is indirect, and Pisces is indirect. So faced with this moon in Virgo, Mom saying, did you brush your teeth the correct way that I told you to do it? Sure, Mom, I did it. There's a tendency, I think, or a potential to slide off the issue at hand to sort of maintain some aura of competence.
I think you're right, but I don't think it's just an aura of competence, although the Virgo moon certainly speaks to that. But within a few hours, the moon moves on into Libra, and as it does, we get the next aspect, which is already close now, which is Venus forming these two green lines are the larger, I mean, they're the most important things going on in this chart right now. And so the same annoyance that we had, that we were willing to lie about here, Venus forming a quincunx to Jupiter says, yeah, I'll keep up the lie, but it's not about being competent, it's about having fun, it's about getting pleasure. I'll do whatever I need to make this feel good.
Yeah, so I think a healthier expression, or perhaps interpretation, because these things work on many, many different levels, is that when that moon moves into Libra, which is about 7 hours after the full moon, and heads towards the harmonious trine with Venus in eclectic Aquarius, the idea is, you know, the details that you were worried about, you thought if I didn't have everything perfect in my resume that I wasn't going to get the job. Well, I did leave out some important things, and I did make mistakes, and I did lie and fudge. But you know, the interviewer and I went out for drinks afterward, and she thinks that I'm terrific. And not only have I gotten a job, I have a new friend. So it can be a social resolution to what appears to be a practical or material problem.
So we have the moon then moving into Libra, and now we get the first next wave, the first next wave of this grand square that will be building all the way through April 20th, which is the exact date that it is the most powerful connection between Pluto in Capricorn, cardinal sign, square to Uranus in Aries, cardinal sign, square to Jupiter in Cancer, cardinal sign, and the moon now in Libra, cardinal sign, making what's called a grand cardinal cross. And keep in mind, we'll talk more about this in a moment, but keep in mind that Mars, which is retrograding, retrogrades back to that point on April 20th, when Jupiter moves forward just a couple of degrees and Uranus moves forward a couple of degrees, so that on April 20th, they're all at 13 degrees, and that cardinal cross will be back again. So this date of March 17th is like a foreshadowing. It's like the playwright says, I'm going to put stuff in the script today that's going to build. Again, we're back to this brush fire, the Ukrainian brush fire, so to speak, that may be in our own personal lives, that is building and comes to a key point on the day after the full moon.
Yeah, and so although the trigger here is the moon in Libra, in other words, when there are big, slower moving patterns that last over a long period of time, it is the faster moving planets going through that often trigger the events or the emotional responses and reactions. And Rick's absolutely right, that moon in Libra is triggering it, and then on April 20th, Mars, which is even heavier than the moon, triggers it as the other three players tighten the tension, the tension grows, the volume gets louder. So where's the way out? It's Libra. It's all about where you stand in relationships. And, you know, Libra's the relationship sign. It's known as accommodating, as being nice and all of that. But one of the challenges of Libra is the separation between I and thou. There's a loss of that. When I sort of asked this gentleman to get off the phone earlier, I got caught in my own Libra. I hope that I didn't offend him in doing that, even though I was trying to, you know, control my own environment here. I was stuck in an uncomfortable Libra place. But that's an incredible place of learning now. that place of where we bump up against each other and what we choose to do with that. And a good friend of Rick's, a guy named Bruce Lipton, wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. He's sort of a metaphysical biologist.
Hay House author.
And what Bruce said is the intelligence in a cell, because he's a biologist, is not in the nucleus, which is in the middle. It's in the cell membrane, the wall, which determines what comes in and what goes out. And if we want to understand Libra, we need to work at the membrane. Work at that place where we really touch each other, not where I'm just trying to be nice to you or make you happy or I'm annoyed about me, but it's really stepping into that place, which is a very mobile and sometimes challenging place of being at a higher level of awareness of where we stand with others, with the different parts of ourselves.
Well said. I jumped this just briefly to April 20th, just so that you can see the juxtaposition of the moon having been here on March 17th, and by April 20th, Mars backing up to that point, and it now squaring the Jupiter opposing Uranus, which is exactly to the degree and nearly to the minute squaring Pluto, and the moon will be in that square on that day also. So we'll come back to this chart next month when we're looking at April and stuff is heating up, but I just wanted to put that up there so that you could see that compared to that there.
So I think when this moon goes into Libra here, what it means is if we're willing to go out on a ledge or an edge then and sort of acclimate ourselves to the complexities of my interest, your interest, patience, immediacy, that ledge gets even narrower in April. And past is prologue. We can rehearse, we can practice for what's coming. And this is a really good opportunity. Take on the lesser crises or moments of discomfort then, and that will be, I think, healthy training and practice for a more powerful and potentially transformative point next month.
The next thing that happens of significance is on the same day, Mercury moves from Aquarius into Pisces and then over the next few days catches up with Neptune. There you see it right there.
So Mercury, the planet of communication, is going out of intellectual, airy Aquarius and into dreamy, sensitive, watery Pisces, on its way to Pisces' modern ruling planet, dreamy, watery Neptune. Great for poets, great for imagination, great for compassionate communication.
Not great for airplane schedules or technical manuals.
Yeah, it's like its own Mercury retrograde, but on another level of reality. Prior to that conjunction, the Sun goes into Aries. That's on March 20th. And Rick, who's in Aries, whose birthday is in early April, mentioned today that no real Aries would wait until April. That Aries...
To be born. In other words, if you're a real Aries, you're going to come in March. Because Aries is me now, first.
And I'm a Taurus, and I always say that no real Taurus is born in April because no real Taurus would come that early.
They're not in
wait till May.
So we decided that April is like there's no sign.
No, that's right.
Yeah, real Aries are born in March and real Tauruses are born in May.
Yeah.
But the Sun moves into Aries every year. The moment of the vernal equinox. This is an astronomical moment where there is technically equal day and night on the planet because of the tilt of the Earth. The equinoxes, the spring and fall equinoxes, the day, the moment of the vernal or spring equinox, every year resets the zodiac positions of the planets. It resets what we call 0 degrees of Aries. one of the great mistakes that people make is that they get confused and they think that what we astrologers call signs are the constellations. We look at the constellations, but the constellations are not the zodiac that we use. We use a seasonal rather than a constellational zodiac. And so the sun's movement into Aries is defined by the first moment of spring, which is the beginning. This is the astrological New Year moment. Aries represents that spontaneity, the immediacy, the urgency. It's what happens now. Ram Dass, who actually shares a birthday with me, different year, who wrote the book Be Here Now, is an Aries. Be here now. This is what Aries is all about.
Yeah, and Ram Dass is a ram. And rams are rambunctious. Rams are about spontaneity, about immediacy. It's the joy of that rising spring energy here in the Northern Hemisphere. Now our southern...
Now think later.
Right. Our southern hemisphere neighbors, of course, have reverse seasons, and the seasonal models break down in lots of this country. Talk about the seasons in Southern California. Talk about the seasons in Florida. They don't sort of correspond, but this is the source of the mythology and the stories upon which the web of astrology has been woven. And so Aries is, as Rick said, the time to be here now. It's a fresh start. It's immediacy. And there's
go ahead.
Aries is a sign of the individual. Now, I mentioned that earlier with respect to Uranus and Aries. And very often with clients, I will encourage them to think selfishly, at least initially. Because there's a certain honesty and immediacy with acknowledging what you really want. You can negotiate, you can compromise, you can accommodate with others, you can be a kind, caring, and generous person. But there's a kind of purity and an essential instinctive honesty with that me first perspective of Aries. And I'm not making an Ayn Rand case for selfishness here as a social model of our collective behavior, but I am making immediacy as a case for immediacy as a point of self-recognition from which we can move to more socialized, humane, and generous patterns of behavior.
Yeah, in a way, what you're saying is if you don't take care of yourself, you don't have the energy or the wherewithal to take care of anyone else. So.
Well, and your aggression's just going to come up later anyway, and because Mars is the key ruling planet of Aries, because there's a connection between the two, the retrograde Mars, and know you first, Libra, when the sun goes into Aries, that tendency to sort of misrepresent what our real desires are could potentially increase.
So on the first day of spring, on March 20th, the sun moves into Aries. Being in Aries, I like to call Aries the sign of ready, fire, aim. Okay. But it's important to understand, as Jeff just said, that for the month that the sun is in Aries, Mars is going to be getting the solar buzz even more. Because there's an interplay, and because the sun is now in Mars's sign, energizing it, we're all going to be feeling that Mars even more, especially since Mars is closer and closer and closer to Earth. And then there's this other thing that doesn't happen. Technically, we can't talk about it tonight under our contract because it doesn't occur until April 1st or 2nd. But that is that as the sun moves into Aries, it's getting closer and closer and closer to its yearly conjunction with Uranus. Normally, that's a time of greater individuality, a time when we might shock and surprise people around us by doing things that on other days we only think about doing, but today we actually do. But this is not just a yearly conjunction of the sun and Uranus, because remember, Uranus is moving closer and closer and closer to its exact square to Pluto and its exact square to Jupiter. So this is again another bump in that perfect storm that is aiming toward the middle end of April.
Yeah, and I think we get another very strong dose of it on the 30th of the month, which is the new moon in Aries. Now the new moon is the beginning of a new monthly cycle. Aries is the beginning of a new annual cycle. So in some ways, the new moon in Aries is really the energetic celebration of the astrological new year. And this is Kanahara, quite an event.
Right, because it is conjunct, it's still coming in, but the moon will actually join up with or conjoin with Uranus just about 4 hours after the new moon, and then the sun will come up and join up with it a day and a half or 2 days later. So the fact here is that we're getting this buzz, this urge, the urge to express, the urge to do. You know what it is? It's a disregard for, a temporary disregard for Saturn. And what I mean by that is Saturn is consequences, Saturn is rules, Saturn is the wall, Saturn is the limit. And with this, and the ram doesn't care about the wall. Why not? Because it'll just run into it until it batters down, it rams through the barrier. And so on the new moon here, it's the beginning of the next cycle, which is a 30-day cycle, 28-day cycle. But the fact is that it's explosive because it's not willing to take no, which is Saturn's job. It's not willing to take no for an answer.
And it's also, I think, explosive because it's making squares or right angles with Jupiter, a planet of, among other things, the truth. In Cancer, a sign that's both protective and traditional. So how can I be new? It's going to piss off Grandpa and Grandma.
Also a planet of excessiveness or overdoing or over...
Right. If you're really free in your heart and in your mind, then you can get away with all sorts of wild and crazy stuff. But if in the act of being free, you're thinking, how are others going to react? Then you may intensify it. Pluto is a repressive planet in a controlling sign, Capricorn, also making a right angle. And maybe the issue is this. This is a time for revolution. It is a time for liberation. But the revolution is with yourself. If the enemy is outside, if you're battling, if you're ramming your head against the walls outside of yourself, you're likely to run into the consequences of Jupiter and Pluto. So Saturn might not get you right away, but you'll be gotten later. But if you tear down your own internal walls of self-identification, self-limiting, the constructs by which you define who you are, then I think you're in a harmonious place that can lead not to just your personal liberation, but as we both talked about, and Rick doing his wonderful quote from Jung, this is how perhaps we can help to save the world.
Yeah, I think that that's really important to keep that in mind through this volatile time. I do think it's interesting also in the days before the new moon, Venus makes both a square to Saturn and a trine to retrograde Mars. And so it's almost like we process the consequences before the event happens.
Sure.
You know, because here we're worried about the loss of love or what someone will think if we say what we really want.
That's Saturn square Venus.
That's the Saturn square Venus. On the other hand, Venus is also trine Mars, and so we might be in an environment where the person that we love or trust is saying, you know, I really love you. I don't care what you know, it's not, I'm not judging you, I'm judging only that you're doing what you need to do. And so this harmonization between the lovers, Venus and Mars, is encouraging us, but this all happens prior to the new moon. And so I agree with Jeff that this is an incredibly powerful period of time.
So discover something new about yourself. Be an inventor. Be an explorer in ways small enough to be safe, but real enough for you to be meaningful. That's your gift to us. And in this way we can each be ourselves, yet benefit one another.